Flow-grown 420 Fields been in the league 5 years now and still hasn't figured it out. At what point do we call a spade for what it is? A bust.
That's legitimate.
I would have liked to see a full year from him, though. Like, that's the thing. Because
I think that's legitimate also.
We could say the same thing about Sam Darnold, Baker Mayfield, Geno Smith. They got opportunities, and they were able to make things right compared to their previous stops. So that's all I'm looking for out of Fields. See if he can get that opportunity. Because I saw a good thing. He really impressed me this year. Like I think if I was talking about Fields going into this season, when comparing him to Kenny Pickett or even like talking about whether he or Rush should start, I was saying Rush should start. I think he's going to give us a better chance to win games. And then going back to even potentially trading for Fields, I was like, bro, how much are we giving up for him? Like, why is anyone like for sure he's even going to be better than Kenny Pickett? What has he done in Chicago? I get he's put up fantasy stats. He's put up some great highlights, but his record's like 8-28, something like that. Like, he doesn't play necessarily winning football. His QB rating, all this stuff gets worse in the fourth. At least the one thing you could say about Kenny is he gets better in the fourth, and he is contributing to us winning games. Like, he's got a winning record. There's something to be said for that. I get Fields no doubt has more talent, but there's more to being an NFL quarterback than just talent. So this is how I was talking about Fields,
right?
I remember, So for me to be saying like I'm ready to give him the keys, he went 4-2. I saw him play this winning football. I saw him get the turnovers down, still make some electric plays. Like I think it just goes to show of like what maybe a new situation, a new organization can do for a guy. And because I think Fields was night and day from what was going on in Chicago. A lot more comfortable, a lot more in command, and still there's degrees he needs to go up in those areas, but. What could it look like if we gave him a full year?
No, I think that's.
And obviously we can't go back in time for 2024, but now we got a 2025 ahead of us.
Yeah.
And it's not like he's 30 years old. He's I think 25. Is he going to be turning 26?
He's still very young.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, still very young. Like I said, when we focus solely on the positive element, the upside of it, the what could go right, I think everything that you bring up is absolutely right. I also think when you bring up what could go wrong with Russ, I think those are valid as well. I also just look at the other side of it also, of obviously what could go wrong with the Fields, but also what could go right with the Russ. And I think that's why the organization is kind of in this whole back and forth about who they're going to commit to, because both of these dudes have legit pros and cons to what they bring to the situation. I think there's a lot more stability with the Russ. I think there's a lot more upside with the Fields. I think that you feel that the ceiling in terms of where Russ can develop into isn't as high as what we think Fields could develop into. But at the same time, I feel like with Russ, it's less guesswork about what he's capable of versus with Fields. We're still going to be asking those questions of, all right, well, the 6 games that we saw last year, is that the norm? Or is that still considered the outlier? Because we saw the multiple seasons in Chicago. And that's what, even you had said it right then, at one point, you said that that's all he was. So are the 6 games truly this change? Or is it just you were able to do this for a short span of time and you had some better matchups compared to the back end, them last 5 games where, shoot, two of these teams are playing for Super Bowls. The other team was a dropped 2-point conversion from going into overtime potentially in the division round. And then you had Joe Burrow and the Bengals, who won the last 5 games in the season, was one of the hottest teams down the stretch. It's like Fields wasn't in that scenario. Now, granted, we'll never know how he would have reacted in it, and that's a different convo. But to me, I think that the variables matter a lot when we're talking about which of these guys we feel better going forward with. Is like all of that type of stuff becomes more in play.
I think that's the risk you run by not going with Fields, though, is like the opportunity cost of not seeing him in those scenarios. Because I'd argue in those first 6 games, he was the most steadying force we had on offense. He was doing, because I remember saying this, he was probably like the most steady thing going when like we had Broderick penalties going on, like O-line penalties going on, O-line looking in disarray at times, and Pickens dropping balls and penalties happening. He was the most consistent thing that kept the offense moving. Like it wasn't just, I know that it was easier matchups compared to like those last 5 games,
Yeah.
but I just don't think everything was perfect from an offensive standpoint
No, it wasn't.
in terms of his surroundings and everything that
definitely
he was
wasn't.
dealing
Yeah.
with. But he came out of it with 10 touchdowns and a pick and went 4-2.
It's the reason why we're having these convos about Justin Fields. It's the reason why you hear Coach T, you hear Mr. Rudy. If they weren't impressed at the least bit with Fields, they're not bringing him up. But the same token is if they weren't impressed with Russ, they not bringing him up either. I just think that for them, they look at both of these dudes as legitimate options, whereas I think us as the consumers, we're kind of already like, yo, we either think that this is the option and that means this guy completely isn't, or it's the vice versa approach of, all right, we think this guy is the option, but this guy we're already moved on from. Whereas I'm kind of with the team. I'm like, how do we know one way or the other just yet? Like, both of these dudes are legit. Both of these dudes showed us stuff this year. Like,
it seems based off Rooney's comments, they are going to pick one though.
Yeah,
it's going to come down to one. So I think that's why people maybe have a stance one way or another right now, just like it's either this guy or that guy. And I think the Steelers even acknowledge that.